The Vatican Chronovisor. The history of unexplained technology usually begins in isolated laboratories, dusty garages, or classified military bunkers. It rarely begins in a monastery. But in the spring of 1972, a quiet, highly respected Catholic priest stepped forward with a claim that seemed to bridge the gap between divine revelation and science fiction. He did not bring a theological manuscript. He brought a photograph of a glowing screen. And on that screen, he claimed, was the agonizing face of Christ during the crucifixion, captured not by a painter, but by a machine. This device is known in modern legend as the Chronovisor. To understand why this story has proved so difficult to completely erase, you have to understand the man at the center of it. The inventor was not a basement tinkerer or a known fraud. Father Pellegrino Ernetti was a Benedictine monk, an exorcist, a physicist, and a world-renowned authority on archaic pre-polyphonic music at the Benedetto Marcello Conservatory in Venice. He was a serious intellectual with a quiet life and a pristine reputation. On May 2, 1972, the Italian magazine La Domenica del Corriere published an interview with Ernetti that shocked Europe. The headline asked if a machine that photographed the past had finally been invented. In the article, Ernetti went on the record, claiming that his obsession with ancient lost music had driven him to gather a team of 12 brilliant scientists to build a device capable of looking backward through time. The machine they allegedly built did not transport physical bodies. It was a time viewer. According to Ernetti's descriptions, the Chronovisor was a large cabinet composed of complex antennas, mysterious alloys, dials, and a cathode ray tube monitor. The theoretical physics behind it rested on a singular premise, that sound and light energy never truly vanish from the universe. Instead, they simply decay, lingering in the ether indefinitely. The Chronovisor was allegedly designed with a highly sensitive, multidirectional antenna system capable of capturing this residual electromagnetic radiation, filtering it, and reassembling it into a visual and auditory broadcast. It was, essentially, a television tuned to history. According to later accounts and books exploring the legend, Ernetti did not build this alone. The story claims his secretive 12-man team included nuclear physicist Enrico Fermi and rocket pioneer Wernher von Braun, lending an air of towering scientific credibility to the myth. With this device, Ernetti claimed his team successfully calibrated the dials to ancient Rome. He reported recovering and documenting a lost Latin tragedy called Thyestes, written by the Roman poet Quintus Ennius, directly transcribing the dialogue as they watched the original performance. But their most dangerous calibration, he claimed, was tuning the machine to the year 33 AD, witnessing the passion and crucifixion of Christ. This is where the story hits the boundary of evidence, and the physical proof violently collapses. The only tangible evidence offered to the public was the blurry, monochromatic photograph of Christ's face printed in the newspaper. Almost immediately, investigators noticed a fatal flaw. The image was not a transmission from the 1st century. It was a near-exact match to a modern wooden carving of Jesus housed in the Sanctuary of Merciful Love in Umbria, Italy. The photograph had simply been reversed and heavily blurred, but the resemblance was undeniable. The exposure of the photograph severely damaged the public claim. Furthermore, Ernetti refused to name the other 12 scientists, insisting they were bound by a strict oath of secrecy. No schematics were ever released. No original, unfaked chronograms were provided. The missing evidence did not end the story. It simply mutated it. The legend insists that the Vatican recognized the existential threat of a machine that could uncover any state, military, or historical secret. A device that could see through walls and centuries could collapse empires. According to the rumor, the Holy See quietly confiscated the Chronovisor, dismantled the project, and forced Ernetti to release a fake photograph to discredit his own work and drive the invention into the shadows. The most grounded explanation is far more mundane. It is highly probable that the Chronovisor was simply an intellectual hoax, a philosophical thought experiment about the eternal nature of human actions, penned by an academic, which tragically spiraled out of control when the press became involved. Yet the Chronovisor survives as a legend not because of the evidence, but because of the man who claimed to have built it. Father Ernetti never enriched himself with this story. He did not start a cult, nor did he seek global fame. He remained a quiet, respected academic in Venice until his death in 1994. According to those close to him, on his deathbed, Ernetti finally confessed that the photograph of Christ was indeed a forgery, and that he had written the recovered Latin play himself. But in that same dying breath, he allegedly maintained one final, defiant contradiction. The photograph was fake, but the machine was real. It had existed, and it was locked away, deep within the silent archives of the Vatican. Kozyrev Mirrors. Picture a sterile, freezing laboratory in Novosibirsk, Siberia, deep in the aftermath of the Cold War. In the center of the room, a human test subject sits perfectly still inside a towering, coiled drum of polished metal. They are isolated, waiting for their perception of reality to fracture. This device is known as a Kozyrev mirror. Unlike many internet legends or missing artifacts, these chambers absolutely exist. They were built, patented, and heavily tested in the 1990s at the Institute of Experimental Clinical Medicine in Siberia, spearheaded by Russian researcher Vladimir Koznetsev. The project was built upon the controversial theories of the late Soviet astrophysicist Nikolai Kozyrev, a brilliant, persecuted scientist who spent his life arguing that time was not just a mathematical concept, but a physical substance, an active energy that could be reflected, concentrated, and manipulated. A Kozyrev mirror is not a traditional machine. It is an architectural and geometric anomaly. The primary device consists of large, continuous sheets of highly polished aluminum coiled into a precise spiral of 1.5 rotations. The structure is large enough to contain a single chair and a human subject. According to the documented Russian patents and experimental logs, the aluminum geometry serves a highly specific function. The metal allegedly shields the subject from ambient electromagnetic fields while reflecting and magnifying what Kozyrev called torsion fields, theoretical ripples in the fabric of space and time. The physical experiments conducted in Siberia are a matter of public record, but what the subjects experienced inside the mirrors rapidly crossed the boundary between clinical science and the paranormal. According to Koznetsev's published findings, when volunteers sat in the focal point of the aluminum spiral, they reported vivid, overwhelming anomalies in their consciousness. Subjects described sudden flashes of ancient historical events, overwhelming feelings of stepping outside of time, and profound spatial disorientation. The claims went even further. Researchers alleged that subjects inside the mirrors could successfully transmit telepathic symbols to other test groups thousands of miles away, and that the intense concentration of temporal energy caused localized magnetic anomalies, including strange plasma glows appearing above the laboratory roof. But this is where the hard science hits a wall of missing evidence. The most crucial investigative gap in the Kozyrev mirror experiments is the absence of objective, non-human instrumentation. If the aluminum coil truly condenses the flow of time, a physical clock placed inside the chamber should record a measurable distortion. Instead, the evidence for the mirrors relies almost entirely on human neurology. We only have the subjective visions of the people sitting in the chair. In mainstream physics outside of these specific Russian institutes, torsion fields remain entirely unproven. The most ordinary explanation for the Kozyrev mirrors is highly psychological. Extreme sensory isolation inside a cold, curved metal drum is known to induce severe, altered states of consciousness. Deprived of normal electromagnetic stimuli and visual input, the brain begins to hallucinate, filling the void with vivid geometry, historical imagery, and a collapsed sense of time. The mirrors may simply be incredibly effective sensory deprivation chambers. Yet, the mystery survives because it straddles a deeply unsettling line. These structures were not built by mystics, but by credentialed academics in state-funded laboratories trying to turn theoretical astrophysics into a physical tool. The Kozyrev Mirrors are not a machine made of gears and engines, but an acoustic chamber designed to trap time itself. And while the strict laws of physics may dismiss the torsion fields, the psychological results remain undeniable. Something profound happens to the human mind when you wrap it in an aluminum spiral, leaving an unresolved question. If a machine alters your perception of reality so completely, does it matter if the physical world outside remains unchanged? Die Glocke. Deep in the Owl Mountains of Poland, swallowed by the dense forest, sits a massive circular concrete ruin. It consists of 10 towering pillars connected by a heavy upper ring. Locals call it the Fly Trap. It looks like the forgotten foundation of a nightmare, looming silently over a landscape scarred by a brutal history. This stark industrial henge is the alleged test site of Die Glocke, the Nazi bell. To understand the legend of the bell, you have to look down. The Fly Trap sits near the Wenceslas mine, directly above a sprawling, unfinished subterranean complex known as Project Reese. In the final years of the Second World War, the Nazis poured vast resources into digging this labyrinth. It was carved out by forced laborers and concentration camp prisoners, thousands of whom died in the dark. The sheer scale of the flooded corridors proves the regime was attempting to build something of colossal importance, hiding their most advanced industries from Allied bombers. The concrete tunnels are documented historical fact. But what was allegedly tested above them is one of the most enduring and terrifying technological myths of the 20th century. In the year 2000, Polish military journalist Igor Witkowski published a book containing a startling claim. He stated that an anonymous intelligence contact had given him access to classified KGB interrogation transcripts of an SS officer named Jakob Sporenberg. Witkowski was allegedly allowed to read and transcribe the file by hand, but not to photograph it. According to Witkowski's notes, the transcript detailed a highly classified Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapon, known simply as Die Glocke. The machine was described as a heavy metallic bell, standing roughly 12 to 15 feet tall and 9 feet wide. Inside, 2 massive lead cylinders were said to counter-rotate at tremendous speeds. These cylinders were reportedly filled with a mysterious, highly radioactive purple liquid codenamed Zerum 525. When the machine was activated, supposedly tethered to the concrete pillars of the fly trap with heavy chains to keep it from launching into the sky, it allegedly generated terrifying anti-gravity and temporal distortions. The story claims the resulting electromagnetic field was so deadly that it dissolved organic plant matter into a black sludge, violently warped the local flow of time, and ultimately killed several of the original scientists who stood too close. But this is where the story leaves the concrete ruins and dissolves into smoke. The physical bell vanished entirely before the Allied forces arrived. More importantly, the foundational KGB transcript has never been produced for public or academic scrutiny. No original blueprint, no shard of the mysterious metal, and no trace of Zerum 525 has ever surfaced. Furthermore, historians and engineers have pointed out that the terrifying fly trap structure is almost certainly the dismantled base of a standard industrial water cooling tower, entirely common to mining operations of the era. Yet, the mystery survives. It has even mutated over the decades, with rumors claiming the bell was smuggled to South America by escaping SS officers, or that it traveled through a temporal rift to crash in Pennsylvania as the famous Kecksburg UFO. The myth of Die Glocke endures because it maps perfectly onto a chilling historical reality. In the final months of the war, German engineers really did produce terrifying technological leaps, from the first combat jet fighters to the V-2 rockets that fell from the edge of space. The post-war world was already stunned by what was found in the German laboratories. It was easy to believe that something even worse had been hidden in the mountains. Die Glocke is a machine built entirely out of missing evidence, held together by the shadow of real wartime atrocities. The structure in the woods is very real, but what it held, or what it represents, remains a ghost. The Philadelphia Experiment Generators. In October 1943, a United States destroyer escort sat docked in a naval yard, wrapped from bow to stern in massive, heavy electrical cables. According to the legend, when the power was finally thrown, the air around the ship began to hum. A thick, crackling green fog rose from the water, swallowing the 306-foot vessel, and then the 3,000-ton warship simply vanished from reality. This is the core image of the Philadelphia experiment. But the true mystery is not just the alleged vanishing of the USS Eldridge. It is the story of the impossible machine that supposedly caused it, and the frantic, handwritten letters that brought the machine into existence. The historical grounding of this legend begins with a real World War II naval procedure known as degaussing. To protect ships from magnetic torpedoes and mines, the U.S. Navy would wrap holes in miles of thick copper wire, running high-voltage currents through them to scramble the ship's magnetic signature. Officially, degaussing made a ship electromagnetically invisible to underwater weapons. But 12 years after the war ended, an eccentric drifter named Carl Allen, writing under the alias Carlos Allende, began sending a series of bizarre letters to astronomer Morris K. Jessup. In these letters, Allende made an extraordinary claim. He alleged that in 1943, the Navy was not just trying to scramble magnetic signatures. They were using a classified application of Albert Einstein's unified field theory to bend light and time. To do this, they allegedly installed massive electromagnetic field generators deep inside the hull of the USS Eldridge. When these turbines were activated, they didn't just bend radar, they warped the local electromagnetic spectrum so violently that the ship tore through dimensions, teleporting briefly to Norfolk, Virginia, before snapping back to Philadelphia. The anatomy of the alleged machine was terrifying in its consequences. The generators were said to be so powerful they disrupted the molecular structure of the crew. Allende claimed that when the ship phased back into our reality, several sailors were found fused screaming into the steel bulkheads of the ship. Others suffered severe temporal disorientation, randomly phasing out of reality in a horrifying psychological condition Allende called getting stuck in the freeze. It is one of the most vivid science fiction horror stories of the 20th century. But when you look for the machine, the evidence abruptly flatlines. The original generators, of course, have never been found or photographed. Furthermore, the official Navy deck logs of the USS Eldridge have been declassified, and they show the ship was nowhere near Philadelphia on the dates in question. There is no corroborating witness to the teleportation, and no physical trace of Einstein's alleged mathematics. The most ordinary and widely accepted explanation is that Allende witnessed a routine, if visually strange, degaussing procedure, wildly misunderstood the physics of the copper cables, and invented a towering myth. So why did the story survive so completely? Why didn't Allende's letters just end up in the trash? Because the United States Navy made a bizarre bureaucratic decision. When Jessup took the strange letters to the Office of Naval Research, the military did not dismiss them. Instead, for reasons that remain disputed, the ONR took the ramblings seriously enough to commission a limited print run of Jessup's book, The Case for the UFO, which Allende had previously heavily annotated in 3 different colors of ink. This incredibly strange government-printed document became known as the Varro edition. The military almost certainly printed the Varro edition out of sheer confusion, trying to decipher if the erratic handwriting contained coded Soviet intelligence. But to the public, the fact that a shadowy branch of the Navy paid defense contractors to print an eccentric drifter's annotations looked exactly like an official endorsement. The Philadelphia experiment is the ultimate proof that an invincible ghost story doesn't need a real machine. The temporal generators never existed, and the ship never left the water. But it survives because a single man managed to get his delusions printed by the Pentagon, proving that an indestructible myth just needs the right missing documents. The Montauk Chair. At the extreme eastern edge of Long Island, New York, a massive, rusting radar dish looms over the coastal cliffs. It sits completely silent, heavily weathered by the ocean fog, surrounded by the decaying concrete bunkers of an abandoned Air Force station. Today, this land is a state park, but for decades this decaying military monolith has served as the visual anchor for one of the most sprawling, unsettling legends in American history. The radar dish is real, but the mystery revolves around an alleged machine buried deep beneath it, the Montauk Chair. Camp Hero was a genuine military installation. Built as a coastal defense site during World War II, it was later upgraded with a colossal SAGE radar system to detect incoming Soviet bombers during the Cold War. In 1981, the military decommissioned the base. They handed the land over to the state, sealed up the heaviest bunker doors, and walked away. The stark, militarized landscape sat abandoned, fueling local rumors until 1992, when an electrical engineer named Preston Nichols published a book titled The Montauk Project. Nichols claimed that the decommissioned base was actually a front for a highly classified black project. According to his account, scientists working deep underground were attempting to weaponize human consciousness and manipulate the flow of time. At the center of this alleged project was the Montauk Chair. According to Nichols' amateur diagrams, the chair was essentially a highly modified sensory deprivation seat, surrounded by Tesla coils, specialized radio receivers, and esoteric technology. The occupant, usually a highly trained psychic, would recline in the chair while their mind was linked to a mythical device called a zero-time reference generator. This equipment allegedly translated the psychic's thoughts into incredible electromagnetic frequencies, which were then pumped up to the surface and broadcast through the massive SAGE radar dish. By focusing on a specific date, the occupant could supposedly tear open a physical portal in space-time. The claims surrounding the chair quickly expanded into a dark, sprawling mythology. The legend states that the operators successfully opened a time tunnel to the year 1943, deliberately attempting to connect with the USS Eldridge and the Philadelphia experiment. Darker corners of the myth allege that runaway homeless youths were abducted off the streets and forced through the portals as disposable test subjects. The project was only supposedly abandoned when a psychic lost control and manifested a physical monster from his subconscious, forcing the military to smash the equipment and seal the bunkers in a blind panic. It is a spectacular story of underground mad science. But when you look for the evidence, the physical reality beneath Camp Hero is remarkably quiet. There is absolutely zero physical proof that the Montauk Chair or the zero-time reference generator ever existed. Despite decades of trespassing and amateur exploration, no vast, multi-level underground laboratories have ever been proven to exist beneath the radar dish. Furthermore, investigators have found no official military logs or employment records confirming that Preston Nichols ever worked at the base in any capacity. The most ordinary explanation is that Nichols, an eccentric engineer with a fascination for fringe physics, wrote a compelling piece of science fiction that a gullible public ultimately mistook for a suppressed historical memoir. Yet the myth continues to thrive, inspiring countless pieces of modern pop culture and paranormal investigations. The Montauk Chair is the ultimate missing machine, a device constructed entirely out of rumors, plugged into a very real radar dish. The mystery survives because Camp Hero is a place you can actually visit. You can walk the overgrown paths, touch the sealed concrete doors, and stand beneath the shadow of the colossal, silent antenna. The story endures not because there is proof of a time machine, but because the towering, brutalist architecture of the Cold War still looks menacing enough to make us believe the military was performing impossible magic in the dark. John Titor's C204. In the winter of the year 2000, before social media and algorithmic feeds, the dial-up internet was a quiet, text-heavy frontier. On one obscure message board, a user uploaded a series of blurry, low-resolution photographs. They showed a heavy black metal box sitting in the back of a pickup truck, wrapped in yellow caution tape. Alongside the photos were scanned pages of a highly technical, dryly written military document. The poster, going by the name Time Travel_O, and later John Titor, claimed he was a soldier from the year 2036. And the box in the truck, he said, was a General Electric C204 gravity distortion unit. Unlike the towering concrete ruins of the Nazi Bell or the Vatican's alleged viewer, Titor's time machine was a masterpiece of mechanical realism. According to the uploaded manual, the C204 weighed roughly 500 pounds and was about the size of a heavy-duty mechanic's tool chest. The schematics claimed it operated by manipulating two dual-positive micro-singularities, projecting a localized gravity field that trapped the vehicle within a temporal bubble. Titor claimed he originally mounted the unit in a 1967 Chevy Corvette before transferring it to a 1987 four-wheel drive truck. The manual he provided was filled with complex diagrams of magnetic housings, X-ray venting systems, and emergency override protocols. It even noted that the user was required to wear an oxygen mask during operation, as the gravitational shifting caused dangerous atmospheric depletion inside the vehicle. The photos of the physical machine showed a chaotic assembly of warning lights, heavy casing, and a remote control unit on a coiled cord, looking exactly like something a defense contractor would bolt into a military vehicle. Titor did not sound like a mystic or a mad scientist. He sounded like a bored mechanic complaining about standard-issue hardware. But the detail that truly anchored the legend was his alleged mission. He claimed the military sent him back to 1975 to retrieve a very specific piece of technology, an IBM 5100 computer. According to Titor, they needed it to debug legacy code in 2036 because the 5100 possessed a hidden ability to emulate older IBM mainframe languages. This is where the story violently collided with hard reality. When computer engineers investigated Titor's claim, they discovered he was absolutely right. The IBM 5100 actually did have that obscure, undocumented feature, a fact known only to a handful of programmers who had worked on the machine in the 1970s. Suddenly, the Internet paid close attention, but the physical proof remained just out of reach. By March 2001, Titor announced he was returning to his time, and he logged off forever. He left behind a string of terrifying predictions about a United States Civil War breaking out in 2015, predictions that completely failed to materialize. To account for this, Titor had claimed his machine operated on a multiverse model of quantum physics. The moment he arrived in our past, our timeline diverged from his own, providing a highly convenient, scientifically literate loophole for any failed prophecies. The most logical explanation is that John Titor was an elaborate, multidisciplinary hoax perpetrated by someone with a deep background in physics, IT, and prop making. Yet the mystery survives because of what is missing. The physical machine never appeared again, but it still had to be built by someone. Someone went to immense trouble to fabricate a 500-pound metal unit, wire it with digital displays, mount it in a vehicle, draft a flawlessly dry military manual, and drop a highly obscure piece of IBM trivia onto a random message board, only to walk away and never claim credit. John Titor did not convince the early Internet with magic. He convinced them with the boring, mechanical banality of a military operations manual. And over 2 decades later, the identity of the person who built the most convincing time machine of the digital age remains a ghost. The Dimensional Warp Generator. It is the late 1990s. The green glow of a heavy CRT monitor illuminates a silent, darkened bedroom, displaying a stark, text-only advertisement on an obscure Internet-classified board. The message is short, strange, and undeniably desperate. Wanted. Working dimensional warp generator. need to undo 1998. This was not an isolated post. If you dig deeply enough into the archives of early Web 1.0 forums and primitive classified sites, you will uncover a bizarre and deeply unsettling subculture. It was a digital underground of people trying to buy, sell, or trade parts for DIY time machines. Among the most sought-after devices in these isolated circles was a piece of alleged hardware known as the Dimensional Warp Generator. Unlike the heavy steel of military-grade time machines, the warp generator was described as a piece of garage-built electronics. Depending on the forum, users claimed it was roughly the size of a suitcase or a standard desktop computer. Its alleged components were a chaotic mix of amateur radio parts, phase-shifting modules, complex circuit boards, and sometimes quartz crystal arrays. The Internet archives prove that these posts were entirely real. People were genuinely communicating across the dark corners of GeoCities and early message boards, claiming that if you wired the right off-the-shelf electronics together, you could warp the local dimensional field. The legend stated that the generator would not physically transport your body, but would rather shift your consciousness backward, allowing you to wake up in your past with your memories intact. Opportunistic scammers quickly capitalized on this emerging folklore. Documented forum threads show anonymous users offering to mail out printed schematics and wiring plans for $50 a pop. People genuinely wired money through the mail to buy these plans, hoping that a soldering iron and a trip to a local electronics store could fix their lives. Other claims blurred the line between amateur engineering and New Age belief, insisting that certain sonic frequencies emitted by the generator could unlock the human pineal gland, aiding the machine in bridging the temporal gap. Of course, the physical evidence for a working dimensional warp generator is completely missing. No functional prototype has ever been photographed, and no one has ever proven they built a machine that successfully shifted reality. The most ordinary explanation is heavily grounded in the darker reality of the era. Scammers were simply taking advantage of mentally ill or deeply grieving individuals on the unregulated early Internet. But, as a piece of modern digital folklore, the concept of the warp generator survives because it highlights a profound psychological truth. The mystery is not about the physics of phase-shifting modules, it is about the true identities of the people who posted the ads. We do not know who was sitting alone at a computer at 3 a.m, grieving so heavily that they were willing to send money to a stranger for a box of crystals and wire. We do not know what specifically happened in 1998 to the person who posted the most famous ad. People are so desperate to fix their past mistakes, to save someone they lost, or to undo a single tragic decision, that they will reach out into the void of the digital landscape looking for impossible technology. The dimensional warp generator is arguably the most tragic machine on this list. It wasn't powered by electricity, anti-gravity, or military budgets. It was powered entirely by human regret. And while the machine was almost certainly a myth, the grief that built the legend was entirely real. Stephen Gibbs HDR, picture a suburban living room in the late 1990s. A person sits quietly in a chair, rubbing a heavy barium ferrite magnet in slow methodical circles over their stomach. In front of them, resting on a table, sits a cheap black plastic project box, the kind you used to be able to buy at any local electronics store. They stare at its 2 numerical dials, waiting for the fabric of reality to shift. This is not a scene from a science fiction film. It was a genuine ritual performed by hundreds of people who purchased a device known as the Hyper Dimensional Resonator. Unlike the military-industrial mysteries that exist only in declassified shadows, the HDR is a machine you could actually hold in your hands. Starting in the 1980s, an eccentric inventor named Stephen Gibbs began building and selling these devices out of his home. For roughly $300, Gibbs would mail you a literal physical time machine, complete with chaotic hand-drawn schematics and instructional VHS tapes. And the documented reality is that over the decades, hundreds of people bought them. filmed themselves using them, and posted their reviews on early internet forums. The anatomy of the hyperdimensional resonator is shockingly mundane. It is roughly the size of a thick paperback book housed in a standard black plastic casing. The faceplate features 2 tuning dials, a power switch, and a small copper coil known as the witness well. The user is instructed to place a biological sample, like a strand of hair, into the well to tether the machine's frequency to their specific biological signature. According to Gibbs, who claimed to have received the original blueprints from a time traveler, the machine was not designed to bend gravity with microsingularities. Instead, it operated on the fringe theories of radionics. The legend claims that by plugging the box into a standard wall outlet, tuning the dials to specific frequencies, and standing over one of the Earth's natural magnetic vortexes, the HDR would interact directly with the human aura. The rubbing of the magnet would supposedly draw the user's consciousness, and sometimes their physical body, through a temporal portal, allowing them to astral project into the past or the future, where they often reported meeting strange interdimensional entities. But when you look for the physical evidence of temporal displacement, you find a jarring contradiction. If you take a screwdriver and open the plastic casing of a hyperdimensional resonator, you will not find advanced microchips or quantum processors. You will find basic copper coils, standard resistors, and a tangle of wires. More importantly, an electrical engineer will immediately notice that the internal wiring does not form a coherent circuit. By the rules of standard electronic logic, the machine should not do anything at all. Furthermore, when users recorded their experiences, their physical bodies clearly never disappeared from the room. The most ordinary explanation is that the HDR is an incredibly elaborate mechanical placebo. The complicated rituals, tuning the dials, focusing on the witness well, the repetitive physical action of rubbing the magnet, act as a highly effective induction technique for a meditative or hypnotic state. The box essentially tricks the brain into severe sensory isolation, leading to incredibly vivid internal hallucinations that feel as real as memory. The more mysterious interpretation, held by practitioners of radionics, argues that the machine doesn't need a logical electrical circuit because it is merely a focusing lens for human consciousness, which is doing the actual heavy lifting. The story of Stephen Gibbs and his creation survived because it completely democratized the unknown. You didn't need a multi-billion-dollar military laboratory or a PhD in theoretical physics to touch the infinite. You just needed a few $100s and a willingness to believe. The hyperdimensional resonator is a machine built not from advanced physics, but from copper wire, mail-order parts, and an overwhelming desire to escape the present. People bought the HDR knowing it looked like a cheap plastic toy. Yet, a startling number of independent, disconnected buyers reported experiencing the exact same terrifying shifts in reality. It leaves behind a deeply strange question. If a plastic box with broken wiring successfully tricks your brain into experiencing time travel, does it really matter if the machine never actually worked? Mike Marcum's Jacob's Ladder. Picture a dark, residential street in the Midwestern United States in the mid-1990s. The quiet of the neighborhood is violently interrupted by the loud, aggressive buzzing of raw electricity. On the front porch of a small house, a swirling vortex of high-voltage plasma climbs 2 metal poles, glowing a brilliant, terrifying blue. The air reeks of ozone. A man steps forward and tosses a heavy metal screw into the center of the plasma. There is a flash, and the screw completely vanishes. This is the central image of the legend of Mike Marcum, known to late-night radio listeners simply as Madman Marcum, and his Jacob's Ladder time machine. Most stories of rogue inventors rely on unverified claims and fuzzy photographs. But Marcum's story is grounded in an undeniable, heavily documented reality. He was actually doing it. In early 1995, Marcum began calling into Art Bell's famous paranormal radio show, Coast to Coast AM. He didn't claim to be an alien contactee or a theoretical physicist. He sounded like a guy playing with lethal amounts of electricity in his yard in Stanberry, Missouri, and the local police records proved he wasn't lying. Marcum was actively trying to build a time machine, and to do it, he needed massive amounts of power. The anatomy of his alleged machine was a terrifying piece of DIY engineering. According to his descriptions on the radio, he constructed a massive Jacob's ladder, a device that sends high-voltage electrical arcs climbing between two metal rods. He claimed to have surrounded this humming plasma field with a circular array of modified lasers salvaged from compact disc players, hoping to warp the localized magnetic field. But a standard wall outlet couldn't power a temporal anomaly. Marcum needed brute force electricity, so he stole it. The documented fact of the story is that Mike Marcum was arrested in Missouri for stealing 6 industrial power transformers from a local utility yard, each weighing over 100 pounds. He was hauling them back to his porch to feed the machine. His experiments were pulling so much current that he was reportedly causing rolling brownouts in his neighborhood. The legend truly took hold when Marcum bonded his criminal record to an impossible claim. He alleged that when he activated the completed array, the Jacob's ladder didn't just spark, it generated a swirling, circular vortex. When he threw a sheet metal screw into the vortex, he claimed it didn't melt or deflect. It simply ceased to exist in this dimension. Marcum's ultimate goal, declared live on national radio, was to build a machine large enough to walk through himself. This is where the story hits the boundary of missing evidence. Marcum was evicted, faced legal trouble for the stolen transformers, and eventually dropped entirely off the radar. The completed machine was dismantled or destroyed, and the vanished screw, the only physical test he ever claimed worked, remains impossible to verify. Because Marcum seemingly vanished from public life, the myth rushed in to fill the void. The most extreme urban legends claim that a man matching Marcum's exact description was found dead on a California beach in the 1930s, clutching a crushed modern cell phone in his hand. The most ordinary and accepted explanation is much quieter. Marcum was a man with no formal safety training playing with enough raw voltage to instantly stop his heart. Realizing the immense physical and legal danger of his experiments, it is highly likely he simply walked away from his own myth, changing his name or living quietly off the grid to escape the chaotic reputation he had built. But the mystery survives because Marcum wasn't just a theorist. He was an incredibly dangerous man of action. Mike Marcum didn't have a laboratory, a government grant, or a physics degree. But he had enough stolen electricity to build a legend that outlasted him. His story ends not in a peer-reviewed academic paper, but in the dark of a Midwestern porch, leaving behind an unresolved question that still haunts late-night radio. Did Madman Marcum step out of reality, or did he just step away from the microphone? The Iranian Aryayek. In April 2013, a startling headline appeared on the digital wires of a major, state-aligned Middle Eastern news agency. It didn't announce a new weapons program, a diplomatic treaty, or a shift in geopolitical power. Instead, Iran's Fars news agency ran a story with a headline that sounded like a glitch in reality. Iranian scientist invents time machine. Before the servers could be scrubbed, the story was captured by international wires. This was the brief, bizarre, and heavily documented debut of the Aryayek Time Traveling Machine. The inventor named in the official article was Ali Razegi, a 27-year-old man who allegedly held dozens of other obscure patents. According to the state-published report, Razegi had spent a decade developing a device that could effectively solve the future. The Aryayek was not a glowing portal, a massive industrial centrifuge, or a heavy military installation. It was described as a startlingly mundane piece of hardware, roughly the size of a standard personal computer case, designed to sit quietly on a desk. Furthermore, it did not transport a human body through the timeline. Instead, it was an information retrieval engine. Aryayek claimed that by taking the touch of a user, the machine used complex, proprietary algorithms to print out a highly detailed document, predicting that specific individual's next 5 to 8 years of life. He boasted an impossible 98% accuracy rate. Beyond personal fortunes, the inventor alleged the PC-sized box was capable of predicting military conflicts, foreign currency fluctuations, and global market shifts. But, almost immediately, the grand claims ran into a wall of missing evidence. Aryayek refused to present the physical prototype or share any of its printed predictions with the press. When asked why the miraculous device was being kept hidden, he offered a strangely mundane excuse for an impossible piece of technology. He claimed he couldn't show it to the public because the Chinese will steal the idea and produce it in millions overnight. Furthermore, the logical gap remains glaring. If the machine accurately printed out 8 years of the future in the spring of 2013, someone should have a documented record of it successfully predicting the events of the year 2021. No such printout has ever surfaced. Within days of the publication, amidst mounting international confusion and mockery, the Iranian government intervened. The article was frantically deleted from the Fars news servers, and state officials publicly denied the existence of the time machine. The most ordinary and widely accepted explanation is a massive journalistic and bureaucratic blunder. An eccentric inventor likely oversold a basic predictive algorithm, or perhaps even a piece of digital astrology software, to a reporter who didn't understand the science. The state agency published it without basic fact-checking, and when the global wires picked it up, the government swiftly buried the story to avoid scientific embarrassment. Yet, the story survives as a deeply weird modern anomaly. It highlights the bizarre intersection where state media, bureaucracy, and science fiction briefly collide. The Aryayek Time Traveling Machine proves that in the modern era, the greatest threat to a miraculous discovery isn't the strict laws of physics, it's a panicked retraction. We will likely never know what was actually inside Ali Aryayek's computer case. The story leaves us with a strangely absurdist question to close the archive. Was the Aryayek an impossible machine, or just an impossible headline? When you lay all these files side by side, a deeply unsettling pattern begins to emerge. From the silent archives of the Vatican to the freezing laboratories of Siberia, from a rusting radar dish in New York to a buzzing porch in Missouri, the architecture of the impossible is always built on what is missing. The original transcripts vanish. The inventors drop off the grid. The blueprints are incomplete. The radar logs contradict the witnesses, and the physical prototypes dissolve into myth just before the world can lay its hands on them. It is easy to look at the missing evidence and conclude that none of these machines ever functioned, that they were all simply hoaxes, hallucinations, or desperate scams. But to close the files so quickly is to miss the true power of the mystery. These devices did not need to successfully bend gravity to alter reality. They altered the people who built them, and the thousands of people who believed in them. They gave a physical shape to the deepest of human anxieties: the fear of military secrecy, the paranoia of the early digital age, and the desperate, crushing desire to reach back into the dark and undo our greatest mistakes. We keep hunting for these machines because as long as history contains missing documents, silent ruins, and human regret, we will keep inventing ways to escape the present. Perhaps a true time machine does not require counter-rotating lead cylinders, quantum microsingularities, or high-voltage plasma. Perhaps it is simply the legend itself, a story strong enough to outlive its creator, defying the decay of time and waiting patiently in the archives for the next person who desperately needs to believe in it.